all entrepreneurs and we all live in the same compound.
Interesting. Yes. How is that? As in, it's quite fascinating. We only hear about that from Indian families whereby they grow together in that particular niche within homes.
I think it's fascinating that people don't. And I find that there's so much more value if you invest at home, because as a group, you're able to do so much more. And it's also a space where you can be honest and vulnerable.
How was that particular experience? What led you to go abroad, to go study abroad?
When you finished Form 4, you were called to university to do what you were told you were going to do.
All right.
You didn't get to choose.
What were you called to do?
I didn't wait to be called.
You called yourself.
Because
all right.
the creative space was very small.
Good evening and welcome to the Late Night Business. My name is Ian Dennis, and as always, each and every week we have a very interesting conversation lined up. So first of all, it's already a few weeks into the year, so let me start by saying Happy New Year. In Kenya, it never really matters. After 1 to 2, 3, 4 months, you'll still say Happy New Year. Today, I have a very interesting conversation lined up, but before I get to introduce my guest, I want to remind you that you're here at the Capital Club, a place you need to be as an entrepreneur. At the Capital Club, you have access to a wide variety of amenities. Where we're filming this is just one of the meeting rooms. There's the spa, there's the gym, there's the restaurant. There's actually so much you can actually do here as an entrepreneur. I also want to remind you that 2 of my books, one, Food for Thought, and the other, Business Conquest, are actually out. You can actually get a copy of yours at the Textbook Center. The lady I'm about to have a conversation with is just quite an interesting and fascinating lady. Just from the brief I've actually been having a conversation with her, I'm so quite fascinated for the conversation you're about to have. Her name is Nyandia Kamawe. She has 2 African names. Very, very rare for us Africans, especially for me who has 2 English names. So Nyandia is the CEO of
Mocom.
Mocom. I don't know why the name actually just skipped me. Nimesoma Nyandia Kamawe. All the names just skipped me. Thank you so much for having come to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I like all the African looks.
Thank you.
What's the inspiration behind it?
It's just who I am. I don't think there's any particular inspiration. I think I've always been drawn to African, specifically Kenyan things.
Interesting.
Yes, handmade things, let me say.
Everything to be made by what's it called, by hand.
Yes.
And the interesting thing, you just trying to describe to me what Mokomaya means. It means made by hands in Kikuyu.
These hands.
These hands?
Yes.
How do you pronounce it?
Mokomaya.
Mokomaya?
Yes.
Me, I'm not saying it like I'm saying it in French.
Everybody does. I think because it's joined into one word, it looks like it should be said that way.
Interesting. Just to start our conversation, I have a quote that I wanted us maybe just to start delving in. So, most, if not all, creations are created from home. Make yours a domain. And I just emphasize more on this particular quote. Innovations often originate from familiar surroundings, emphasizing the importance of cultivating a creative environment within one's home. Something interesting you're mentioning to me earlier on as you're having this, what's it called, before we started filming this, is like, your home is more like an Indian home. So many creatives, so many businesses being run from home.
Yes.
Tell me more about that.
So I come from a family of entrepreneurs. My dad is an architect. My mom was in real estate for the longest time. She's now into farming. My brother is into fitness, so he's into gym equipment, coaching. Then I have 2 siblings who are out of the country, but they're both entrepreneurs. One has a skincare line in the US and the other one has a jewelry line in the US. So we are all entrepreneurs and we all live in the same compound.
Interesting. Yes. How is that? As in, it's quite fascinating. We only hear about that from Indian families whereby they grow together in that particular niche within homes.
I think it's fascinating that people don't. For me.
All right.
So as fascinating as it is for you that people live that way, for me, I'm like, a lot of us Kenyans have like ancestral land.
Yes.
But then we rent in Kilimani.
Yeah.
And we can't even afford Kilimani.
Yeah.
And I find that there's so much more value if you invest at home, because as a group, you're able to do so much more. And it's also a space where you can be honest and vulnerable, as opposed to like renting an office space somewhere. There's different pressures. I'm not saying that there's no place for those things. There is a place for those things. But I do think that for what I do and for the examples that I have in my life, that environment is what has cultivated an even more productive business for me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And just growing up in that environment, because you mentioned mom has been in real estate, now is in farming, dad is an architect. What are some of the earlier, elements, maybe values that are actually poured just to ensure that over the years, that the home has still remained a key element of the family and the home also has remained like a creative element of the family?
So I have to say that we didn't start off living like this. Yeah. but we've always been entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
So dad had a business, he had an office in Westlands, and it was the thing. However, COVID came and just kind of shook up a lot of things, because there was a moment of like, wait, why are we paying rent? We have space, we have structure, we have...
So it was COVID?
COVID really shifted how we lived.
All right.
In terms of our business, but living, we were already living together. Growing up, for me, because everybody's dad was like a doctor, working at a Khan, or I had a different exposure, because he was always doing projects. So even if you're not necessarily, I mean, he's still an African dad, like you're not going to work with him every day or anything, but you got exposed to that aspect of business, of starting something from scratch and then all the way to the top. As a kid, I know I've experienced foundation, mchanga, those things, and then you see like a full building. So that was, I think, maybe the most fascinating things, because as having seen the drawing in flat form, and in those days they were drawing by hand.
Oh yeah, so
So
like
to
these
see,
days, the transformation.
so to see that transformation, and also there's patience. And I have to say that it's not like I was sitting there being inspired as a child. I honestly, I'm looking back now and I can see where the inspiration came. But I don't think at the time when I was living it, it was like, oh, I'm inspired, I will be an entrepreneur. I really wanted a job in an ad agency. So I studied in Atlanta. All I wanted was to work in an ad agency, but none would have me. I got a job with a mega church, which was a consulting job. I got a job with, everything I got was not an ad agency.
It was not what you wanted.
It was not what I wanted. It was always pushing me towards teaching. And, but at least the creative aspect of it always stayed constant. And so now again, another moment when I look back at my life today, I can see that teaching, not in the same format of a classroom, but with the people that work for me, because what we're doing, we are having to fabricate our own machines, train a person how to use the machines, train ourselves how to fix the machines. So like, I'm still a teacher. And so now I'm teaching people how to paint, the products that we create, I'm teaching them how to cut, I'm teaching them how to polish, I'm teaching them. So everybody that works for me, I've had to teach something, because there is no school.
And as you mentioned, those influences, probably when you look back, probably, what's it called, you're unknown, because you mentioned dad was an architect, but now you're more in the creative field. You always, the pursuit that you wanted to get into the creative industry, and you pursued, because you studied in Atlanta, and you pursued fine arts. Just take me through your interesting journey in terms of just, what's it called, having this particular pursuit of interest and never getting to get it per se. How exactly was it for you? Because you had to work in an ad agency, you never got that. When you look back in retrospect,
I look back and I know that I wasn't for that space. Ad agency life is very high energy, high stress. And it also doesn't give you much freedom, because you're always working for someone to create something that does what they want it to do with a result that's expected. While as what I'm doing right now is an expression. So I express and people engage and like.
Your expression.
It still serves a function, but like I'll give you an example of what I'm trying to say. If I make a glass from a bottle, how I paint it, how I decorate it will speak to a specific person because of the colors, because of the shape, but it's still a glass. So whoever gets it will use it as a glass. Sometimes you'll find someone use it as a pen holder, makeup brush holder, or whatever. Whereas in an ad agency, you have the expected result at the end, and then now it's like, go make this happen. And so now I look back and I know that that wasn't necessarily where I was meant to be. I also know that, I mean, I'm sure ad agency life in Kenya is stressful, but the one in the US is on steroids. And it's also I feel like it's a very young energy. Like you're only cool for a very short time,
period of time,
and then it's like, it's time to go. And the creative director job is only one. So every agency, you have a creative director that's so old, and then these young people who just kind of get churned through. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful because I didn't have that straight, predictable path in my career, because I had really mapped it out. And the experiences that I did end up having, when I look at my life today, have really contributed towards that. Because even growing up, like I have a mother who never threw away anything. Like, and when I say anything, I know like it's typical to keep a blue band container, to keep a paper bag, but my mom throws nothing away.
The blue band can still be a cup.
It can be a cup,
it can be a toothbrush holder.
And so now I look at it, I'm like, because that shapes your way of thinking. And so how you exist in the world is very different. Ad agency is very high we get rid of things,
Yeah.
and we spend a lot of money, and we create this big 3D thing, and then tomorrow it's in the trash, you know. And that, for me, it lacks something that I really need.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Just take me through your journey. So primarily, you in Kenya, a big part of your life, and then you managed to go abroad. How was that particular experience? What led you to go abroad, to go study abroad?
What led me to go to study abroad? Everyone was going abroad then. Yeah. Number one, there was not very many opportunities. In terms
Which
of college.
year was that?
Trying to age me over here. That was 96. So when I finished Form 4...
I'm not aging you.
No. I'm cool with it. When I finished Form 4,
Right,
it was 93.
Yes.
You see, I can't even remember. That's how old.
All right.
So what happened is then
The
you
old
got...
is gold.
Yes. And so you called... When you finished Form 4,
Yeah.
you were called to university to do what you were told you were going to do.
All right.
You didn't get to choose.
What were you called to do?
I didn't wait to be called.
You called yourself.
Because
all right.
the creative space was very small. You either went to KU or main campus. So that really narrowed down who was going to make it. And then on top of that, there's the grade expectations. My grades told me immediately how ending I would be university. And so it was very clear very quickly. And then also again, I've realized I'm not a rigid, structured person in that sense. So I don't think that those institutions would have really served me.
Right, yeah.
So I was lucky and privileged to be able to go to the US. So I go to the US, and this is pre-internet, pre-WhatsApp, pre all those
the
things.
.com era.
Yes. And so it's a lot of like just walking in it's like walking in a room with your eyes closed, because you completely disconnect the moment you left JKIA. Because the cost of staying in touch was very high.
It's high, because internet was called
phone
calls per minute.
Yes, per minute.
And were there even phone calls then, or it was just...
It was phone calls. You could call, but you had to get a calling card.
Yes.
And it was super expensive. So anyway, so you then are thrust into this space where you're like, who are you, and what are you up? Like, you left Kenya with a very clear idea of who you are. And the moment you land there, you're like,
it's different.
It's different, right? And different and especially because the town I first landed in was a very small town, and it was predominantly white. And the majority activity was building spare parts for the railway and growing corn for America.
All right.
So it was like, you've come from watching Fresh Prince, and in your mind, that's where you're going.
Yeah.
When you get there, you're like,
the prince
there's
wasn't
maids
fresh.
everywhere, So it was a lot of just
Culture
trying to figure out shock, because then now you start to realize, like, even in Kenya, I have this, I don't even have this here. But it was also freeing in the sense that you have this box that you've lived in your whole life, and it defines who you are. But being thrust in an environment like that allows you to just now figure yourself out.
Interesting. And you're alone?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, I'm the firstborn in our family, so I was the first one to go. And that's a good thing and a bad thing. I'm not going to get into the bad, but the good is that you really do get to chart your own way. So I did that till 2011 when I came back.
All right.
I eventually moved from that small town to Atlanta because I realized that doing an art degree in a town like that was just not giving me life.
Yeah.
So I moved to Atlanta just after the Olympics in Atlanta, because that was like, hey, there's a town in America with black people and it's thriving, and all the Fortune 500 companies were setting up. So with my vision of ad agency life, I'm like, that's a good place to be, because all the big companies were moving down there. So anyway, so I did a degree in the arts there, graduated, and then the ad agency life wasn't happening. I kept on getting everything but that. But and then also you're still an immigrant. That's just the reality. So immigrant life thrust into, like, most immigrants who go to do law, medicine, and then you've come to do art. And so people would ask my dad, unatuma mtoto akachore. Like, like what? I mean, it was also discouraging, because you also don't have fellow Africans who you could connect with and like share the same. Because even when I went to a black town into an art school, the people in my particular major, like, I had that one black friend, and she can add until we finished. Because it was still considered like a jungu white kind of space. There was black kids in the school because our school had video production, audio production. It was a purely art school, so it had fashion, it had all these other disciplines. But in my particular discipline, were very few black people. So that was different, but it also pushed my standards. Our school had very high standards in terms of the quality of work, and our school was mostly focused on preparing you for the commercial life, and not necessarily discipline in art. So not much of, there was a very traditional school in Georgia that is also very popular. It's the Savannah School of Art and Design, and that one is more traditional. So you get into a lot of like very traditional art stuff before you get to commercial. Yeah. Ours was focused on like, you're gonna get out of here and you get a job. Yeah. And so our training was based in that. So it was very helpful, and when I look back, like that has been the most valuable thing.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I can say for sure it was worth the going. It was worth the struggles of trying to figure it out. Yeah. Because it really set me apart, because I was still able to hustle on the side here and there, do branding projects, do design projects.
The American life, and having been in America, what's it called? You've started there. You've been there for almost a decade. You've been to the best schools and just had all that particular experience. And also having worked there, at what particular point did you decide to come back home? Because normally the journey for most is that let me go study there, let me get a job here, let me settle there. What was that particular moment that made you decide to come back home?
I don't think it was like one specific moment, but it was like, I think who I am just inside me is very Kenyan and very Kikuyu. So I think the longer I stayed there, the clearer it became that this was not my place. But then I had an accelerated moment in 2011 where I was just like, it felt like I need to get out of here. I can't tell you that there was one particular reason or the other, but I even started having dreams. I would dream like I'm in a Kenyan setting, and then I'd wake up and I'd be so upset.
I'm like, I'm in America. Yeah. The same way most Kenyans dream they're in America, and then they wake up.
I literally had a dream once that I was in a soko. And it felt so good, and then I woke up and I was like, yeah. And I called my mom. Because I was like, you won't believe. Because I'd never, the longer you live somewhere, the longer you dream in that setting. Yes. So I had not had a dream where I'm in a Kenyan, let alone a market. Yeah. And so she's like, yeah, it's a good idea. Yeah. But literally from that moment, it was a very accelerated journey back home. Because I decided within that week, and I think 2 weeks later I was in Kenya.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And coming back home, you still became a teacher. You were for a while.
So what happened is when I came back, I didn't have a network. Nairobi is very cliquey. So if you don't have your people in Nairobi, you can have all the skills in the world, but like really getting into places or even knowing which places you need to get into is difficult. So I saw a tweet asking for a design teacher to volunteer, and I thought it was a good opportunity to kind of work my way back into Kenyan society. So it also gave me something to wake up and do in the morning. So I started volunteering for this organization. And then that evolved into a full-time job. I was teaching full-time. I was also their communications and branding person. And so that became 9 years. And then I was like, wait, this was not supposed to be 9 years. And so that's when I started what I do now.
Interesting. And how was that, maybe even before we just end this part one of the show, is that how now did you make that particular transition? So here you are, you'd worked in the States, you came back, you worked for a teacher for 9 years. And then why did that particular entrepreneurship bug to just set off come?
As you may have noticed from our story so far, I don't have this like methodical approach to life. I'm a very time. We're going.
It's done.
Yes, it's just like that. And I don't know that it's the healthiest. I wouldn't advise everyone to think that way. But I think that for me, I'm a gut truster. And so usually when my gut is really like pushing me in a direction, I've learned to trust it. And so again, the jump from teaching into entrepreneurship was one of those where I remember having the first Zoom call after we went into lockdown. The first Zoom call, I was like, yeah, okay.
Need to zoom out.
I'm out. Because you see now, teaching design virtually, it just sucks all, the remaining joy was completely gone. Because design is very interactive, it's very visual, and so teaching it online was just not necessarily...
It's not giving.
Yes, it wasn't giving. So I made a decision, but at the point I wasn't making a decision to start a business. I was just quitting. And then I quit, and then it's like, wait, what am I gonna do? And that's when I started tinkering around, because everyone was making banana bread and doing whatever during COVID. and posting like, yeah, like me, this is what I'm doing. And so people started asking like, how much are you selling? And I was like, what? Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All
So
right.
that's how I started.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So we're going to end on that particular point, note, and then in the second part, you're just going to find out how was the birth of Mocom, how exactly has it grown to this particular point in time, and that just find out more from this particular interesting journey from America back to Kenya, COVID, and then eventually pursuing entrepreneurship. Until next time, I'll see you right here on the Late Night Business.